Então, muito bom dia, mestre Amit. Viemos hoje aqui, desde o Brasil para a Romênia, para falarmos sobre um tema muito interessante e que causa muitas questões aí no mundo científico e também por terapeutas. Nós vamos convidar o nosso mestre hoje para conversar conosco sobre os campos morfogenéticos e litúrgicos. Dr. Amit, as your master student in quantum science in the University of Technology, Jaipur, India, I feel very, very happy and honored to have you here to this interview with questions that are somewhat thought-provoking for the world of science. Be very, very welcome. Today, it's 6th of September, 2023.
Thank you. I'm glad to be talking with you. The questions you sent me are great. I'm looking forward to going through the interview.
Thank you very much. Então, nós vamos fazer as perguntas em português para ficar muito claro também para os alunos do Brasil. O professor Amit vai responder em inglês e depois nós vamos fazer a legenda traduzindo. Doutor Amit é PhD em Física Nuclear, referência mundial em estudos que buscam conciliar a ciência e consciência, sendo autor dos best-sellers A Física da Alma, O Universo Subconsciente, A Consciência Quântica. Tornou-se mundialmente conhecido por participar do filme Quem Somos Nós? E atualmente dedica-se a ministrar palestras, cursos em todo o mundo, estando sob a coordenação do curso Quantum Science para Saúde, Felicidade e Prosperidade na Universidade de Tecnologia de Jaipur, na Índia, orientando alunos de todo o mundo em mestrado e doutorado em ciências quânticas. Doutor Amit, a palavra medicina origina-se do latim, que tem o significado de arte, de curar. Associa-se ao verbo medere, que corresponde a curar, tratar, cuidar. No Brasil, nós temos 29 práticas integrativas complementares de saúde, reconhecidas pela Portaria 702 de 2018 pelo Ministério da Saúde, que inclui diversas medicinas tradicionais, acupuntura, reiki, constelação familiar, homeopatia, entre outras. E essas terapias são disponibilizadas para a população. Como o senhor vê a postura da Organização Mundial da Saúde em estimular essas práticas de medicina tradicional como integrativas da medicina convencional? E como esse cenário é ao redor do mundo?
I'm delighted that many countries are adopting the position of World Health Organization in legitimizing the practices of traditional medicine, such as Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, homeopathy, etc. Family constellation in Brazil are particularly popular. So this is a very, very good event, and the reason is also very straightforward. These practices have proven useful whenever implemented in any country. And furthermore, the decisive issue right now is that the theory of all these medicinal practices are now emerging, especially when we use the quantum science of consciousness, which I originated, but now it is developing in the hands of many people.
Yes. And which countries do you know that have these medicines?
Say it again.
Which countries do you know?
I know in India there is a Ministry of Health which have instituted a subdivision called Ayush. A stands for Ayurveda, Y for yoga, U for Unani, S for Siddha techniques, and H for homeopathy.
Great.
So that's a very good beginning. And right now, one of our PhD students at the University of Technology is Sangeeta. She's working with Ayush to develop a quantum integrative practice for them.
Question 2. Rupert Sheldrake se referiu a campos porque a comunidade científica não aceitava falar em alma ou consciência. O senhor utiliza os termos consciência quântica, tem um livro chamado Física da Alma. Não seria epistemologicamente mais apropriado usar o termo metafísica em vez do termo quântico para os fenômenos da consciência, uma vez que este é o domínio material e o quântico se refere à menor unidade discreta de um fenômeno? Por exemplo, um quantum de luz é um fóton e um quantum de eletricidade é um elétron. Se algo é quantificável, então pode ser medido. Mas a consciência é algo imaterial que não pode ser medido. Por que o senhor escolhe usar o termo quantum quando trata de metafísica, em verdade?
I'm glad you are asking this question. This is very basic. So indeed, quantum just means a grain of light, a building block of light, like an elementary particle of light. And what does that have to do with consciousness? Okay, so how this becomes an issue of consciousness has a long history. Yes, light was discovered as a grain, as an elementary particle. This is how the situation began. But light was already known to be a wave, which is very unlike a particle, wave spread. So this became a paradox called wave-particle paradox. And for a while, it created a lot of puzzle, a lot of assumptions, but it was clear that consciousness is needed to resolve the paradox from the beginning. Eventually, the solution that emerged is the solution that I proposed, and that solution is that the quantum objects are waves of possibility, just as the mathematics suggests. Mathematics never suggested that quantum objects can become particles. It always suggests quantum objects are wave, period. How it become a particle is a question of measurement. And measurement ultimately a question of observer, human observer. So in this way, I suggested that what happens is that the quantum objects are waves of possibility, just as the mathematics says. When we measure, when an observer measures, the possibilities collapse. But the collapse cannot happen without a distinction taking place. In other words, consciousness is a oneness that contains material possibilities. But because it's one with the possibilities, it has to also produce a distinction with the objects. To produce that, it needs to identify itself with the brain of the observer. This is the fundamental thing that confuses people. When that identity takes place, then there's a subject-object split and consciousness can see. So in this way, the proper explanation has no paradoxes. Particle wave paradox is resolved, but also paradox of quantum measurement is resolved. What produces quantum measurement? The observer does.
Yes, thank you very much. Question 3. Temos percebido uma certa confusão, como o senhor recém comentou, né? Conceitual, então, sobre o fenômeno campo morfogenético, como Sheldrick, em seu livro Uma Nova Ciência da Vida, refere, e que o senhor complementa com o termo litúrgico, porque do grego significa ação ou função. Então, essas estruturas, além de darem a forma aos organismos desenvolvidos, morfos, também contêm o programa, como o senhor chama, software, da função dos organismos. Algumas pessoas se referem a esse campo como sendo um campo eletromagnético. A pergunta é, podemos afirmar que o termo campo eletromagnético trata-se de um conceito da física mecanicista, em que tudo é matéria? O que é um campo eletromagnético, afinal? E o que diferencia o campo eletromagnético do campo morfogenético litúrgico?
This is also a very confusing aspect of Sheldrick's theory. How should we interpret it? What are these morphogenetic fields? Are they non-physical or are they physical like an electromagnetic field? Electromagnetic fields have been known in physics for a long time. Electrical charges have electric field, magnets have magnetic field. Then we discovered that a moving electric charge has both electric and magnetic field. So that combination is called electromagnetic field. So there's no mystery there. But of course, the problem is really this. From the beginning, the problem of life has been a difficult problem. For example, whole theory of Darwin, evolution theory, is based on the idea that any living creature has survival as an instinct. They want to survive. And nature acts on their survival instinct, enables them to survive by selecting which genes modification will enable them to survive the most. But one crucial assumption is going on here. If we make it a materialist theory, if Darwin's theory is interpreted in the materialist way, which people do, then they have to make the assumption of molecular biology that everything that happens in the world in the living is the same as what happens in the world of the non-living. There is no difference. Biology is chemistry, is physics ultimately. But then if you assume that physical objects don't have anything called survival, molecules don't try to survive, physics just does not allow that concept. And indeed, people have tried to produce survivability of molecules in the laboratory. They have never been able to find a surviving molecule in the laboratory. So the big question for explaining living creatures is that how do we have this survival instinct? And of course, the explanation is actually can be given only by assuming that matter, we just propose that are possibilities of consciousness to choose from. Similarly, we must assume that living fields that are responsible for our living programs, there are also possibilities of consciousness to choose from. So these morpho-liturgical fields that Sheldrake proposes, if we give a quantum adaptation to it, namely that accept the fact that they are quantum in nature, these are quantum morpho-liturgical fields, and consciousness uses them as a blueprint for mapping ideas like survival into matter. So what actually happens is that these morphogenetic fields, as consciousness is collapsing these morphogenetic fields and the energy is felt by us as security because we are surviving, at the same time, the morphogenetic fields collapses organs that are connected with survival, namely our organs of digestion of food. So you see how digestion, which is required for maintenance of the body on the physical level, can represent the survival, which is at the feeling level. So morphogenetic fields determine the feeling levels parallel to the physical level where we have digestion. Digestion is completely a physical process. There's no problem with that. Whereas survival is not. Survival is something that only consciousness can want. It's a consciousness idea. Yes. Okay. So in this way, the morphogenetic fields of Sheldrake have to be interpreted as possibilities of consciousness to choose from to bring the living programs map the living programs in the physical body through the action of a parallelism. Consciousness collapses the morphogenetic field on one hand and collapses matter on the other hand.
Yes, great. Thank you very much for your explanation. Question 4. O senhor, em suas aulas, doutora Amit, aos alunos do mestrado, PhD, e no decorrer da sua obra, que somam diversos livros publicados ao redor do mundo, seria correto afirmar que o senhor, doutor, sugere que os campos mórficos, que é um gênero de campos morfogenéticos litúrgicos, segundo Sheldrake, são campos quânticos porque caracterizados pelo princípio quântico da não localidade, pois não fazem parte do espaço-tempo na realidade manifesta, correto? Esses campos não locais, não físicos, estão fora do espaço-tempo e se correlacionam com os nossos 5 corpos, os koshas, que são chamados na cultura hinduísta o corpo físico, mental, vital, supramental, sublime, de que trata a filosofia hindu. por meio do princípio que o senhor denominou, hierarquia entrelaçada, estaria correto esse conceito? Em síntese, estariam os campos morfogenéticos litúrgicos ligados ao corpo vital por meio dos 7 centros energéticos, conhecidos como chakras, pontos de energia que decorrem de nossas... e esses campos de energia, eles são responsáveis, eles são campos vitais, responsáveis por expressarem em forma de energia os nossos sentimentos, que decorrem de nossas experiências, cujos significados a esses sentimentos são atribuídos por meio do nosso corpo mental. Seria isso um exemplo de hierarquia entrelaçada? Ou seja, informações do campo morfogenético litúrgico ou comportamental, como também subdivide Sheldrick, que por sua vez encontram uma correspondência nas experiências do nosso dia a dia, boas ou ruins, gerando uma sensação no nosso corpo físico, seguindo de um pensamento que significa, que dá um significado a essa sensação, e a seguir um sentimento, bom, uma satisfação, uma angústia ou ruim, que por sua vez gera uma desordem, um desequilíbrio, uma desestabilização energética vital, que pode ser medido até mesmo por aparelhos de radiestesia ou aparelhos de eletroencefalograma, eletrocardiograma, por exemplo, atingindo por fim a função celular, não o DNA. E esse então seria o estudo da epigenética, e que acaba se mostrando essas disfunções então em forma de doenças. Teríamos resumido que a origem das doenças é quântica, ou seja, inicia no mundo imaterial. Tudo então, saúde, doença, começa em verdade no campo imaterial, quer dizer, no domínio da potencialidade ou das probabilidades. Isso também quer dizer que estamos despertos. Se estamos despertos, podemos dominar o nosso cérebro para a escolha dessas possibilidades e reduzir as doenças. Como o senhor vê toda esse conceito, que é uma criação sua, uma linda criação sua?
Long question. Okay, let's take them one by one. So, first of all, morphogenetic fields indeed are quantum fields. They have to be quantum because otherwise we get dualism. How does this non-physical fields interact with the physical? If they are quantum, then consciousness can mediate. The physical must have a quantum part, and if the morphogenetic fields are quantum, then consciousness can collapse morphogenetic fields on one hand, giving us feelings, and the physiology of the physical organ on the other hand. So this works out fine. With basic assumption here is that there is a quantum correspondent aspect in the organ. There must be a place in the organ where there is quantum movement. Otherwise, this parallelism cannot be maintained. So both physical body has to have a quantum component, and morphogenetic fields have to be assumed to be quantum. And if they are quantum, this connection that consciousness makes is a non-local connection. This is not going through any signals. So quantum connections to consciousness is always non-local, without signals. So that explains non-locality. The koshas then, they correspond to all the different experiences that we have. We have experiences not only of the physical and the vital, which we have covered so far, but also of the mental and also supramental archetypes, like love and beauty and such. And then finally, we have experience of consciousness itself in the form of happiness. If our consciousness expands, then we feel happy. Ananda in Sanskrit. So there are 5 types of experiences, and the Hindus called it kosha, which is a sort of covering of ignorance, because they thought we have to penetrate this to achieve salvation. Because all the spiritual traditions in the ancient time wanted to get rid of all the suffering that life brings, and they wanted salvation. That was the only way they thought, is to take care of the suffering. There's no other way to heal all sufferings. Indeed, in the olden days, sufferings were enormous, so you can understand their feeling. But nowadays, of course, we realize that it is not really, the world is not really suffering producing. It's our inability to deal with it that produces suffering. And we are dealing with the physical sufferings better now. So nobody thinks that we have to penetrate this koshas. Instead, we now recognize that the koshas gives us the programs of living. And progressively, the koshas, these bodies, 5 bodies we now call them, they improve the quality of our living. For example, animals only have inanimate. They don't have any life at all because nothing changes. Inanimate just stays put, completely governed by physical laws. To animate, vital body enters. What happens immediately, we have some quality of life. Life takes place, which is a special organization, which brings the idea of experiencing something apart from life. So life and its environment. How do we experience the environment? The development of the vital body takes care of that. That brings up the chakras. Initially, we have only a few chakras connected with reproduction and maintenance. But as we evolve, we bring in other chakras, including the mental brain, which is also a chakra, the brow chakra. So this way, evolution can take place, and that indeed leads to better and better quality of life. That's the idea of these energetic centers of chakra. So we have covered up to the third one. Now let's see. Let's go down now to more. Okay, tangled hierarchy. No, this is not tangled hierarchy does not come in yet. The idea of tangled hierarchy comes in only when we talk about the final body, the self. How consciousness itself manifests in the brain or the body, that can happen only through a tangled hierarchy, because a oneness can never split into a subject and object except as an appearance. But without that split, collapse cannot happen, because collapse requires both choice and distinction. Consciousness has to distinguish itself from the object that collapsed in order for experiencing the collapse. Otherwise, oneness cannot experience itself. So collapse and distinction, both are important.
Yes.
Distinction takes place when consciousness can identify with the brain or with the living self. This identity, identifying with a physical object, takes a tangled hierarchy, because consciousness has to be misled, has to be kind of tricked into believing that it cannot escape. How that happens then is that brain, for example, has a part of the apparatus in the brain which enables us to perceive. We call it perception apparatus. Then we also have a part where we make the memory of what we perceive. Both are essential for collapse, because until you have a memory, we cannot say that the object really has collapsed. So this perception and memory apparatus, they, however, make a tangled hierarchy. Because if you think about it, perception requires memory, but memory requires perception. Both are causing each other. It's called a circular connection. So that's the tangled hierarchy. When tangled hierarchy happens, then consciousness is tricked into believing that it cannot get out of the tangle, at least momentarily. That gives us the self. And then there is a further process that's called dependent co-arising, where the memory is processed through feedback, reflection in the mirror of past memory, and that's what gives us the self that we experience, which not only has produced a distinction, but also has forgotten what it was, namely the oneness. That's our ego. So in this way, we have now the total explanation.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. Question?
You also have a question about disease. So the disease has also origins in all of these 5 bodies. We can have disease at the physical level, virus and bacteria. We can have disease at the vital level. Vital programs can go wrong. We can have disease at the mental level. Mind can give wrong meaning to a stimulus, producing disorders. Eventually that becomes a disease. And even supramental, like love keeps us healthy, but lack of love, lack of supramental eventually can translate into immune system weakness, and that can produce disease. That's a supramental disease. And then even at the level of unity consciousness, oneness, we can have disease because, for example, if you are a psychopath, then you are totally disconnected from consciousness. And eventually the psychopathic mindset, which is initially is a mental disorder, but can easily translate into something like a disease. Many psychopaths eventually have disease.
Yeah.
So in this way, disease can happen at all levels. Similarly, the healing also has to happen at all the levels.
Yes, 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 great. Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Question 5, Dr. Amit. Rupert Sheldrake sugere que os campos morfogenéticos são estruturas que armazenam hábitos e memórias de tudo que é. Na sua visão, é correto afirmar que os campos morfogenéticos litúrgicos armazenam, além do programa de formas e funções dos nossos organismos, também memórias de experiências do mundo ao longo dos tempos e também dos nossos sistemas familiares, por exemplo, como hábitos ancestrais e até mesmo doenças e comportamentos? E qual a diferença, então, do conteúdo que fica armazenado nos campos morfogenéticos litúrgicos e da memória lógico-racional, e de sensações e sentimentos que, segundo os neurocientistas, são armazenados no cérebro, mais especificamente pelas sinapses dos neurônios, né? É possível fazer uma distinção entre memórias cerebrais do domínio da realidade e mórficas ou morfogenéticas do domínio da potencialidade? Poderia citar exemplos de alguns experimentos científicos que nós podemos evidenciar esses princípios quânticos que comprovem essa memória toda, passado, sentimentos, ações lógicas, instinto de luta ou fuga, o que faz bem, o que não faz bem, como uma célula, por exemplo, sabe o que é tóxico, o que é alimento. Isso tudo não está localizado no aparato da matéria, no caso dos animais ou humanos, que chamamos de cérebro? Onde está localizado essa memória?
Okay, so this again has many components, so let's start from the beginning. Yes, Rupert Sheldrake did claim that the morphogenetic fields can store habits and memories connected with habits. And this is true, but he does not give any explanation. The explanation is provided by the quantum mechanism. In quantum physics, we find that process that I talked about earlier, reflection in the mirror of memory. So if you have, see something and an image is created, like I am seeing you right now, Lizandra, and I know you, I have met you before. So I also have past memories of you. So as soon as I see you, that seeing you at the moment is producing also the memories of previous you in my brain, and I have to also respond to those, so the brain responds to those. This repeated feedback between responses taking place, this produces a modification of the probability of these responses. So the responses that are more frequently called becomes more probable, and other responses less probable. So what happens as a result of all this is that progressively the memory is influencing the original response, and this is what we call habit, conditioning. When the past memory is determining what you are going to do at the moment, we call this conditioning. So that is a habit. And indeed, these habits are not located in the brain. These habits, they are learned traits that we learned. we learn something that produces the habit. Learning, memory of learning, this that is produced by this reflection in the mirror of memory, happened through the quantum equation. That's the equation that changed because of continuous feedback from the memory, and the result of the equation telling the behavior is changed. But equations don't exist in the physical world. Equations are representation of something in the supramental world of ideas. It's a product of an idea. Idea is truth. That's what it's coming from. And so these ideas that are changed in the supramental possibility realm, that's what is ultimately storing the memory. So memory is not stored, indeed, in the physical domain, in the physical memory, in the physical brain, but instead, memory of learning is stored really in the domain of potentiality. Domain of potentiality as the place where the mathematics is created, the origin of the mathematics. Okay, so in that sense, we can roughly say that for vital habits of the vital software, as we call it, those are stored in the morphogenetic field potentialities in consciousness and in our unconscious, some of which are very compulsory and very universal. That universal part we now call collective unconscious, following the designation of Carl Jung. So in this way, Sheldrake tried to explain also the collective unconscious, but quantum science gives you a much better explanation, because Sheldrake doesn't say why it is unconscious. We explain why it is unconscious, because it's the domain of potentiality. There is no lived experience in that domain. So in that way. Okay, so that's your first one. And then the second one is, so first one, my response already covered the idea that yes, the content of an experience is stored in the brain, but what we learn is stored in the domain of potentiality. Okay, now C, can we make a distinction between cerebral reality domain and morphic memories? We just did. Indeed, the distinction is that one is learning, a capacity, a characteristic habit that the self has. It's you and I who have the habits, we use the habits, whereas the memory in the brain, that is just about objects. We can describe it, we can declare it, but it has no, it does not correspond to some habit of me. Okay,
yes,
so there is a distinction.
Yes, great.
Okay, let's go into this fourth one. Can you cite examples of scientific experiments? There is the great experiment of Carl Lashley, a neuroscientist who worked with rats. He taught rats a very simple thing to learn, namely in a Y maze, where one side of the Y has electric shock, the other side of the Y has cheese. Rats naturally very quickly learned to find cheese. And then he decided to chop off parts of the brain of the rat to find out where the memory of learning is located. But he found that even with 50% of the brain removed, the rat could still find the cheese. And mind you that the 50% does not have to be one place. It could be 50% in many different places of the brain. So that indeed proved conclusively that memory is not in the brain. Memory of learning is not in the brain. The episodes of learning are in the brain, but not the memory of the capacity of learning itself. That capacity is located in non-local domain of potentiality.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so then the number 6.
Yes, this question.
Yes, it's a very important one. This is the basis of the big breakthrough that family constellation therapy has made, and is our ancestral memories engraved in DNA. So this is not at all true, because they have nothing to do with really the DNA. They're habits, they're habits of learning. We already decided that that's non-local memory that's stored in the divine potentiality of the subtle, not in the physical. So to say that it's in DNA is be wrong. But family constellation therapy says it's in a family, so that suggests that it should be in the DNA, because the DNA we know is inherited. Can the others also be similarly inherited? But how? There is no mechanism of inheriting, it seems, initially, of the non-local memory. But this is not exactly true. Because the memory of these things are non-local, therefore we can actually support an idea that is millennia old, idea of reincarnation. So we can say that these non-local memories are what reincarnated. A person who has lived in a previous incarnation and developed some habits, non-local memory, then the person in the next life can inherit some of this non-local memory by non-local transfer. Not local transfer through DNA, but non-local transfer. Accessing the same memories that in the past incarnation, but of course he is reborn in a different body. Now, of course, this is how they come to be in one family. It is just empirically found that when people are reincarnated, they often take reincarnation in the same family, producing a dynasty. This is the basis of why we had hereditary ancestries in kingdoms. Kings inherit, the children inherited the kingdom, but it worked. The children were also often as able as the parents. How was that possible? It is possible because the learned characteristic also travel not through the genetic mechanism, but through the non-local mechanism, because people take incarnation in the same family over and over. So family constellation therapy is based on that, this idea.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Okay, so we have that.
Question 7. Podemos afirmar, então, que esse campo morfogenético litúrgico é uma estrutura informacional ou de influência imaterial? Essa grande matriz misteriosa que armazena esse plano, ou essa planta de estruturas das formas e funções dos organismos, na sua visão quântica, pode ser modificado? Os circuitos cerebrais negativos e os circuitos cerebrais positivos emitidos no nosso dia a dia também tornam-se hábitos e passa a integrar esse campo de informações ou influência em nossas vidas?
Okay, so are they informational structure? Well, everything can be called an informational structure, but this is morphogenetic fields are a very special informational structure. It gives us the programs of living, and that involves more than just information. It involves feelings. Feelings of what? Feelings of the basic archetypes that govern living. Indeed, instead of physical laws governing the laws of movement of material, for feelings, we have the archetypal laws that govern the movement of the morphogenetic field. In other words, archetypes come through the intermediary of the morphogenetic fields to manifestation of feelings. That's how they work. So it's indeed an influence that goes much beyond just information. They're information that can decide what we'll do. Information processing has no ambiguity, but feelings have often ambiguity, as we can experience ambiguous feelings all the time. You see somebody, but you are not sure. Is this somebody good for me or bad for me? You cannot tell. That ambiguity, do I like or not like? It's not straightforward, either like or dislike. Oftentimes it's a gray area. We both like and dislike. So that ambiguity is the characteristic of quantum and something that goes beyond information. Information is completely Newtonian. It's completely computable. There is no ambiguity in information. Okay. So that is but this is a very good question, Liz. Fantastic question. Okay, then can this, yeah, the functions, can they be modified? Yes, that's the whole idea. So these morphogenetic fields that we make vital software of living, the whole idea is that yes, lifestyle can be wrong and they produce wrongness of the software because the software can be modified by our lifestyle. Similarly, if we change the lifestyle, the software can be remodified and take us to health. So this modification of software, that capacity is extremely important. And what is happening also, something notice that the software is vital. Something is modified also at the physical. At the physical level, what is happening? As I change the software, those quantum part of the physical that we discussed before, that quantum part of the physical, that behavior is producing physiology, which is also changing, because that quantum part of the physical is what is responsible for the physical. But that part, consciousness is now adjusting so that new proteins can be made, new physiology, and new physiology means new function, and that could very well not have the disease. So it is really, really, truly a very, very interesting thing that takes place. The genes themselves do not change, but what genes will be activated change. So genes that are activated that was producing disease can be changed into new genes to be activated, which will not produce disease, but will produce health. So in that way, genes are not completely outside of our control, as was sometimes thought. They are within our control.
Yes, very, very good, Master. Thank you so much for your time. Nós ficamos muito felizes aqui no Brasil e que todos os estudantes do mundo possam aproveitar esses minutos riquíssimos, né, com o nosso mestre, nosso professor, Dr. Amit Goswami. Gratidão, muito obrigada por o seu tempo.
Thank you, Liz.
I'm so glad to stay with you.
Of course, me too. There were
Bye
great
bye.
questions I have said. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.